Hey, this is Dr. Ben Weitz, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast. I talk to the leading health and nutrition experts and researchers in the field to bring you the latest in cutting-edge health information. Subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast for weekly updates. And to learn more, check out my website, drweitz.com. Thanks for joining me, and let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Our topic for today is building a holistic healing strategy and maximizing joy on a cancer journey. Well, we've had a number of discussions on the podcast on an integrative or functional medicine approach to helping to manage cancer patients, including Dr. Nalini Chilko, Holly Lucille, Nasha Winters, Thomas Seyfried, Paul Anderson, Elise Alschuler, Gio Espinoza, and others, but only a few with someone with personal experience with cancer, which is what our discussion today with Julie Stevens is about. And Julie will share her experience of how she developed a strategy and worked her way through a successful cancer journey. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. And perhaps you can start by telling us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, happy to. So hi, everyone. My name is Julie Stevens, and today is my 45th birthday. So I just want to remind everyone who's listening to be a data G and go get your data. That could be colonoscopies, mammograms, or annual physicals, but get your data because that's really the story of what's unlocked my cancer journey. So it was just shy of 2 years ago I was diagnosed. So it was June 14th of 2022. I was diagnosed with what ended up being stage 4 aggressive and inoperable chemo-resistant colon cancer. So a heck of a diagnosis.
That's a hell of a diagnosis, exactly, for anybody to deal with, especially somebody who's new to really the healthcare world.
With no symptoms, no signs, I was no family history, under the age of screening, which was 45. So it really was.
Which is interesting how you say you had no signs, no symptoms, and it just is something that we all need to keep in mind. I hear so many people say, well, I'll let my body tell me what's going on. And unfortunately, sometimes that's not the case.
For me, it was just I had lower iron than I've ever had before. And luckily, my primary care physician took that really seriously. And I was just in the middle of a major work transition. I was leading a piece of an acquisition we had just purchased. And so my life was wildly stressful. And I thought I had an ulcer. And she said, let's go ahead and get an upper and lower endoscopy. And so I called my gastro, and 3 times they told me, you don't need a colonoscopy. You're under 45. You have no family history. And my response was like, I'm a data gal. Let's just go ahead and get it. Like, I'm willing to do the prep. So let's get the data. And thank God I did, because my gastro woke me up and said the tumor was so large, they couldn't get the infant-sized camera to the other side.
Wow.
So that was the beginning of my journey in June of 2022. And in July of 2022, unfortunately, my colon actually closed. So I had to go get a right hemicolectomy and have about 12 inches of my colon removed and 61 lymph nodes. Those came back. And of course, the cancer had spread. And so they had suggested 6 months of chemotherapy. And while I don't know really anything about science, I'd had the luxury during the rollout of Obamacare of working with the American Hospital Association in the world of industrial psychology to define different jobs. So I understood the job and the industry of healthcare very well. I just didn't know science. But also taking into account my history working in the field of industrial organizational psychology, I understand how to use data to predict outcomes. That's what I do every day. And so when the oncologist said, we'll do 6 months of chemo and then we'll do a PET scan, I said, oh, no, that's not my story. We're actually going to do 6 months, like right after the first chemo, I'd like to test for efficacy. And she kind of rolled her eyes and said, oh, honey, that's not how we do it. So in this condescending voice. And I was like, then I'm not going to do chemotherapy. And that was the moment I went rogue, because I don't know science, but I knew data. And if they weren't willing to let me track the data my way, I didn't trust that doctor. So I had to start from scratch and really build a team around doctors that would really suit what I was looking for. And I even built, again, as using my industrial psychology hat, a criteria for what I'm looking for in a doctor, and actually built a selection system to find the doctors that would really play my way. And my way was using the most current data, willing to think outside of the box, willing to challenge the standard of care. I understand why the standard of care was created, and that was to create operational efficiency. I helped organizations understand how to do that. So I don't look out for
operational efficiency.
That's exactly right. And that's not what I'm looking for when your life is on the line. I'd have 14% chance of survival.
Right. Interesting. And we see that all the time, unfortunately, in conventional medical care.
That's exactly right. So luckily, the first hire on my team, I would say, was an herbalist. And I kind of walked into his office thinking he was going to tell me to align my chakras and stop eating sugar, which he did. But in addition to that, he's like, why are you here? And I said, well, I want to understand the data I can measure, I can use to measure treatment efficacy. And he's like, oh, yeah. And he pulled up a website from cancer.gov and it had the CA19-9 and CA125 and all the different things you could pull. And then he goes, but wait, I can top this. Do you want to understand the data you can use to predict if the treatment will work before you ever start? And I was like, yeah, I didn't know that was possible. And then the third thing he told me was, listen, we can not only do that, we can build your body up so you won't feel the side effects. That had my attention. So hence right away, he was hired onto the team. And in fact, he did all three of those things. So I knew I was chemo resistant before I started. My oncologist did not trust me and told me, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I'm the expert. And so I went through 2 chemotherapy sessions where I tracked my data outside of what they were doing. So I was able to identify I was chemo resistant, inform my oncologist about this, do the required testing, and then pivot to what actually worked.
Wow.
But it wasn't just the herbalist. I also had hired, I should say, an acupuncturist, a reflexologist, a chiropractor. So I had all sorts of traditional healers, all designed to really heal different parts of my body as my oncologist was working on treating cancer cells. So I really felt like it's up to me, knowing 92% of cancer is built because of what we eat, drink, think, and do, or epigenetics. So it was up to me to figure out why the root causes of cancer were expressed, because it wasn't genetic in my case, and to also use the best of any science that was available. And for me, the science that worked was science that was released in 2020, 2022, 2023. So it was very, very, like it was happening real time as I was going through my treatment. And that was not the way my oncologist was working. And he was the chief of staff at a major academic health center in Atlanta. So this wasn't a slouch or a small person I was working with,
my podcast is devoted to functional medicine, and you just beautifully explained what the functional medicine concept of how we treat patients is by looking for the root causes, getting your body as healthy as possible to be able to handle whatever care we're going to have, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a great statement of the functional medicine mission statement without even really having any experience in functional medicine.
That's the part of this that's been the most shocking to me, is that I truly did not understand how much power we had when we build up our immune systems, and how critical it was, and how hard it is in today's world. I've had to change just about everything about how I live, from the food I eat to the activities I do to the stress I keep and the sleep I make sure I get and the rest. And it's really difficult to do that. And it really takes a lot of effort when you think about how we actually live in today's standard American lifestyle.
What you just said about the immune system is really significant. I don't think most patients, even cancer patients, understand that without your immune system playing a very vigorous, active role in helping to kill cancer cells, no matter what other form of treatment you get, whether it's the strongest chemo in the world, whether it's the strongest radiation, you're only going to kill a certain number of those cancer cells. And there's always going to be a certain amount of cancer cells that are not directly killed by that. And that's your immune system needs to be stepping in and playing an active role. And then whenever you stop your treatment, the immune system needs to be continually working on eliminating cancer cells and controlling their growth, et cetera, or your care won't be effective. And of course, you utilized immunotherapy, which is an example of some of the newer forms of cancer therapy that involve getting your immune system to play an even more active part in eliminating cancer.
I think it's important to note, though, while immunotherapy was a huge part of my strategy, I had done all sorts of work to my body so that the immunotherapy would work. So
Right.
I'd gotten off of the medicine for my GERD. I also had looked at every single reason for inflammation. I think this is a really important part of my story of before cancer, I was diagnosed with cancer. I'd had a disorder called chronic idiopathic urticaria. That means for every day for 13 years, I had hives. Sometimes
Right.
from head to foot, I was miserable. Sometimes I couldn't even brush my hair or hold a pen or walk because of these hives. And I had gone from doctor to doctor to doctor to figure out what was driving these hives. And everyone just put me on more pharmaceuticals. So before I was diagnosed, I was taking biologic shots every 2 weeks, up to 8 Zyrtec a day, and 3 different pharmaceuticals to mask the hives, and it didn't mask the hives. So flash forward to listen, my very first meeting with Oscar, my herbalist, he said, we got to worry about your inflammation because cancer feeds on sugar, inflammation, and copper. So let's go ahead and figure this out. And he did this test that was by Dr. Russell Jaffe. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. It's an ELISA.
Oh, yeah. He's been on the podcast.
Sure. It was the ELISA LRA test. And that
This is
one
like a food sensitivity test.
Exactly. And it unlocked every single reason why I had hives. So for 13 years, I've been miserable with this diagnosis. So not only did I heal the cancer, I healed the root causes of why I had so much inflammation. And I had to do all that preparation work for the immunotherapy to work so flawlessly. And it's important to say, not only from immunotherapy, but also chemotherapy, I didn't have side effects. I was going to music festivals in Mexico during treatment. And that doesn't happen to the average person. But because I'd done such a beautiful job of having enough magnesium and vitamin D and vitamin K, my body rode through the waves without any problem.
That's great.
Yeah.
So explain how explain how getting off your omeprazole and doing some of the other things you did to heal your body, how did that play a role in helping your body fight cancer?
Well, I think the important part is like you want your body, and the way that this was described to me by my healers was, listen, you have like an army of 10. And when you deploy your army so that they're worried about this inflammation and this, you have this Glade plugin that creates this, and you have this toxicity and this chemical that you're having a reaction to, and you're using this makeup, your body's fighting all these wars. There's no troops to fight cancer left. And we want all of the troops fighting cancer. So the job is to create homeostasis in every way you can so that your troops are focused on what's important. That's cancer cells, not on helping to moderate the impact. Because for me, it was green grapes. I was poisoning myself every morning by eating green grapes because that was my favorite food. And come to find out, that was giving me hives every single day. So by helping my body avoid fighting the trauma of green grapes and focus on cancer, I was able to heal that. But I think it's important to notice, besides your urticaria, besides the cancer, I've also had a complete body transformation. So I've lost 140 pounds. Every single part of my body, if you were to look at my blood markers, I look like a totally different human being. But it's because I was able to refocus on grounding myself every day, getting enough sleep, really healing my body the way it needed to be healed, and giving it that homeostasis so it could work in its most functional, optimal option way.
What sort of nutritional approach have you been using in your cancering journey?
The first thing I did was kind of anything that was non-organic left. So I really started to use grass-fed beef and eggs and all the things. But then I started to kind of so the first thing was just as clean and as pure as I could without any chemicals. But then I started to really get choosy about the types of food I ate. So the majority of my diet is plant-based as much as I can. I do eat some seafood. I eat eggs every day, and I have some poultry, but not a ton. So I've really been able to shift that to be almost all plant-based. I make sure I focus on getting 5 colors of vegetables a day. That was my challenge for this year. Once I understood the different nutritional value of having green versus red versus purple vegetables, I understood that you can't just eat a bunch of broccoli and think you're going to have enough. It really is the diversification that allows your gut microbiome to really thrive.
So you reduce your consumption of animal protein?
I did. And for me, as I mentioned, I did the ELISA LRA test, and it showed gluten, soy, sugar, green grapes, tuna, and scallops. So I have completely eliminated those things from my diet. Sugar was probably the hardest, and that still is the hardest because when you travel or eat out, you never know if sugar's in the sauce or the salad dressing or things like that. So it is challenging to really make sure you have a zero diet, a zero sugar diet. But as much as I can, I've gone to zero sugar. And then, of course, gluten was the thing that was a challenge to begin with. But really, the reality is there's so many beautiful gluten-free products now. I don't even miss it.
Cool. Did you change your diet around the times that you got your treatment?
Oh, yeah. So I should say my treatments don't look like the average person's treatment. So I think that's
Okay.
when I did chemo, yes, I fasted. So I really, so part of my training as an industrial organizational psychologist was I broke down every single side effect that could impact me during the treatment. And I built a plan to moderate it. So that's part of why I didn't have side effects. So I fasted for every single infusion. I made sure I had.
Did you fast for how long?
24 hours before for the 24 hours of the infusion and 6 hours later. So I really tried to do before and after.
Okay.
I also like iced. So cold sensitivity, I was on oxaliplatin. Cold sensitivity is a reality for that one treatment. So I put my hands and feet in ice and I ate ice chips the entire time. So I had no problems with cold sensitivity. I had to fight really hard against my healthcare system to allow me to do that, but I was able to avoid that entire side effect of any cold issues.
Cool.
Yeah.
What are some of the other important lifestyle factors that you utilized?
So you mentioned one when we started, and you mentioned my mantra of maximizing joy. And I think that's a really interesting one because that is something that's kind of uniquely me, and I think in my journey. I decided when I was diagnosed, and because you feel overwhelmed with fear, and I immediately decided I will not do this journey in fear. I will do this journey in joy. And that takes a lot of mental practice and really work to be able to do that. So I started to feed my mind superhero movies. So instead of watching the news, I watched Iron Man to understand what I could do. So I read books. I asked my network to send me pictures of rainbows and puppies and flowers and all of the things because I really wanted to utilize.
In other words, Marvel Comics is directly responsible for your recovery.
For me thinking I was a superhero, that's fair. That's fair. And I brought that in. So part of my strategy is I went to my first treatment and I hated being there. As you can imagine, it is the worst place on the planet when you look around and you think all of these people are dying around me. And that's what I thought. And I thought, I can't have this energy. So the next one, I got dressed in costume and I brought gift bags and I brought, so basically I decided to have a luau. So, and you can imagine I walked into my second chemo, my first party, and walked in and said, "Hey, you want to get laid in chemo?" and had lays for everyone and glasses and gift bags. But part of those gift bags were I had a lot of frustration. So I hand hammered bracelets for everyone that said ride the wave. And I gave out 60 gift bags that day. So at the end of my first infusion, this woman walked up to me and said, "Listen, Julie, I was planning to commit suicide tonight, and I'm not going to because I met you, and I know I can ride this wave." And I realized right then I might be the only person that's crazy enough to get dressed in costume and bring gift bags to an infusion, but every single person here needs it just as I did.
Right. Awesome. So you discuss how you use genomic data to predict treatment success. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so this is pretty cool. And I think I'm guessing most of your listeners know this, but for anyone who doesn't, I thought colon cancer was a thing or breast cancer was a thing. But come to find out, it kind of matters where it is, but really what matters is the genomic makeup of the tumor cells. So for me, I was a GKRAS13D was what my tumor cell was genomically named. Well, come to find out, because I was KRAS positive, my herbalist had done research in lung cancer that showed that the platinum-based chemotherapy wouldn't work with a KRAS positive tumor. So I brought this research and my genomic data the morning of my first chemo to my oncologist. And I said, "Listen, this isn't going to work. Let's just go ahead and pivot to immunotherapy." But come to find out, because of the standard of care, you have to fail at chemotherapy before they'll open up immunotherapy. He didn't know I understood why he was forcing me to do chemo, but I understood the red tape was there because of my experience working in the field of industrial psychology. So I laughed. So I was like, all right, I'll do this, but I don't trust you. But it was really the understanding the genomic fingerprint, which is required to have some sample of the tumor. So it's not possible for all cancers right away. But as soon as you can get this, I would implore you to utilize this data. And let me share, I didn't call one time to get this data. I called over 20 times to get my oncologist to pull this data. This is not standard to pull it this way. Typically, they let you use 6 months of chemo, they fail, and then they'll do genomic testing. But once I understood that could predict treatment efficacy, I was willing to do whatever it took so I could get that data as fast as I could and have that early in my process. And so for everyone,
unfortunately, the reason why you were forced to get this traditional chemo first, it has to do with the attempt by the healthcare system, by the insurance companies to spend the least amount of money possible. And, taking traditional chemo is less expensive than immunotherapy. And unfortunately, that's a factor.
It sure is. But you know what else is a factor? How your doctor is compensated. And unlike almost any other drug on the planet, your oncologist is compensated based on the number of chemotherapy sessions administered. So it's important to understand this is, and if they want to do something that is not the standard of care, the amount of paperwork and challenges and meetings they have to go through to get that approved, it's not a small task. So you want to find an oncologist that is a maverick, that is willing to think outside of the box and challenge those assumptions. It took me an army to get this done, but it is worth your energy.
Yes, sometimes you have to swim upstream in the healthcare system to get the care you really need.
It's true. And you are your best advocate. Nobody cares about you like you do. But I knew the squeaky wheel got the oil. That's true in everything we do. But I also knew the squeaky wheel that was positive and not a pain in the butt got better oil. So again, by throwing these parties and bringing stickers to everyone and postcards and showing my appreciation for everyone there, I got what we call incremental effort from every single healthcare professional, whether it was the front desk person, whether it was a nurse, whether it was my oncologist. They all spent a little extra time with me or came by to see me or checked in with me after my session. So by bringing the best of who I was to these sessions, I got the best of my healthcare team as well. And I would encourage anyone listening to really think about, don't bring sticks, bring carrots, and get them to really engage in your story.
What was the particular genetic test that you utilized?
I used the NeoGenomics. So that was, that was the specific genomic test. The genetic test I used was just through my hospital system, and they did the standard.
I meant the genomic test, the cancer characteristics. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So I used NeoGenomics, and that was really important to me. I actually had two different, I was switching oncologists at the time, so I had both of them pull. So I had Caris and NeoGenomics, so I was able to compare what we thought were the two very best genomic providers out there. It was almost the same data, but NeoGenomics gave you a few extra factors. And one of those, to go back to your earlier question about how I changed my diet, this is an interesting one. So my herbalist had mentioned, listen, if you're HER2 positive cancer, and olives are natural indicator natural reducer of HER2 positive cancers. So while I hate olives, I'm willing to eat 8 olives a day if that's what I need to do to keep my body cancer free, because this is a HER2 positive cancer and olives can help reduce HER2 positive cancers. So those are the sorts of things that when you understand it, you can actually feed your body the tools it needs to repair itself. Same thing with kiwi. Kiwi actually repairs your DNA. I had no idea until I got on this journey, but so now I'm willing to eat 2 kiwis a day. It's easy when you feed your body the right things.
I don't think most people are aware of that. So there's data to show that kiwi repairs your DNA.
That's exactly right. I have a podcast as well. So I have an episode with a person named Peter Broadhead, who was an herbalist. He had a nutrition store. He's had all sorts of different worlds. And he came on and gave us some really beautiful data about the types of foods you need to eat. So things like mushrooms, kiwi, et cetera, that can really impact your health outcomes.
Yeah, mushrooms we know for their immune strengthening properties, the mucopolysaccharides.
Yeah.
So in terms of, you mentioned a few things. What are some of the other ways that people can decrease some of the side effects of traditional cancer care like chemo and radiation?
Well, I'm going to say this. I actually built a tool, so it's all available on our website for free. So you can go on and put in what chemotherapy you're taking or any side effect of any medicine. and understand the supplements, the diet, the lifestyle, or the healers you could use to avoid that side effect. And so your question might be, how did I collect this data? Well, again, I'm an industrial psychologist by trade, so I understood how to build the formula and the protocol for how to do this. Then I went out and worked with experts around the globe to get the feedback on what would you do if what can a chiropractor impact from a side effect perspective? What can an acupuncturist impact? So I went out to each of these specialties to understand what the opportunity was and did surveys to experts in those areas. So I got their feedback, and then I used a number of different practitioners to help me build the list of what these supplements could be to avoid these side effects. Come to find out, and this is one of the things that my team taught me, is if you start chemotherapy and your body's kind of idling at an 8, you're going to drop to a 6 and you're never really going to feel it. But if you start chemotherapy and you're at a 5 and you drop to a 2, you're on death's doorstep. So make sure you start these treatments as strong as you physically can be, so that when you take the hit, it's no big deal. And so that's part of it, is beyond everything, make sure your overall health is as strong as possible. That means sleep and meditation and giving your body a rest before you start treatment. I mean, I was walking. I literally have walked and exercised more than I ever have since I've been in treatment, knowing how important that was, not only from a health and wellness perspective, but for example, that helps express your lymph nodes. And for me, that was really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times patients going through traditional cancer therapy like chemo feel like crap and don't have a lot of energy. So they tend to avoid exercise and conserve their energy.
And that's the whole point. Your body needs the right fuel to have energy. There was never a day, besides when I was in surgery. So let me say that once I was healed from surgery, there was never a day when I was in treatment that I wasn't strong enough to go to work, to go out for a walk, to make my own food. I never had a day where I wasn't well enough, but that was because I had done all the preparation work to make sure my body would sail. And so you're either going to pay for it before or after. When you pay for it before, it's a lot more enjoyable for the way you live your life.
Yeah, you're mentioning another concept, which is one of your principles that you mentioned, which is that when you have a diagnosis of cancer, all the treatment is focused on trying to kill the cancer. And yet the health of the host is super important. As you're mentioning, if you go in at a level 5 instead of a level 8, your ability to even handle the treatment is going to be greatly diminished. So there needs to be equal amount of focus on making sure your body, your health overall is at a highest level possible, that you have good energy, that your blood flow is good, that your immune system is good, all these things that are going to play a secondary role in helping you to fight the cancer, survive, and also make sure you don't die from something else.
So that was kind of the big thing that was a takeaway for me is and again, I'm using my industrial psychology brain. Your oncologist job is to reduce cancer cells. It is not to make you live a long and happy life 15 years after treatment. So
Right.
they're really focused on one microscope. And when you understand that microscope, you want them to do that, but you also need support so that that doesn't kill you. So things like when you think about certain types of radiation, that's cool that you don't have cancer anymore. You just died from radiation, or you had this horrible chemo. I just talked to someone who was a saxophonist for one of my favorite bands, and he was diagnosed with the exact same genomic type of cancer. And I talked to his wife a couple weeks before he died. He had gone through the standard of care where it was one chemo, a more intense chemo, the third hardest chemo. That chemo is what killed him. It wasn't the cancer.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah.
You mentioned 6 toolboxes to build your strategy. Maybe you could summarize what are those 6 toolboxes that are important in your cancering journey?
Yes. Can I I'll give a really fast history lesson too.
Sure.
So one, you think your doctor is trained on all these things. So again, using my history, I went back and studied medical school curriculum because I believe we can only hold our doctors accountable for what they know and the data they have access to. So when I went back and studied medical school curriculum, I understood the little that they knew about 6 toolboxes. So I consider the 6 toolboxes: pharmaceuticals, botanicals, nutraceuticals, diet and lifestyle, environment, and facilitated healers. In their curriculum, is pharmaceuticals. And when I went back to understand why, it was because of something in the 1909 that was published called the Flexner Report. So many of you might be familiar with the Flexner Report, but that's basically where they went out to have some continuity of medical school curriculum. And in that, if you taught acupuncture or herbalism or chiropractic as part of your medical school curriculum, you lost funding. So in 1910, our doctors went from being jacks of all trade to masters of pharmacology. So it's really important to understand it's a really valuable toolbox, but it is one toolbox. And it's up to you to get your botanicals, nutraceuticals, diet and lifestyle, environment, and healers in line to heal everything else.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case that traditional medical doctors know little or nothing about nutrition, herbs, alternative care. They're basically taught that those things are not super important. Yeah, nutrition matters somewhat. So, don't eat a couple of foods, and that's about it.
Don't eat lunch meat, don't eat sausage, don't eat bacon, and don't eat meat, or what they told me. But the reality is like that's so far away from the reality of how I can make my body thrive. And when I understood that, I was like, cool, this is your box. But it was important to note, it's not that they didn't tell me not to take the herbs. It's not that they didn't tell me to eat the food. They told me, hey, no, you shouldn't do this.
Oh, 100%. In fact, those herbs are unproven. They contain antioxidants that can counter your treatment.
So I was strong enough to push back and say, if you can show me one research article that this is true versus your fear of how it'll impact, I will stop right away. And they couldn't come up with one research article. So I was like, cool, this is my body. What I do outside of your office, you're responsible for cancer cells. I'm responsible for my body. You keep working on my cancer cells, I'll keep working on my body. But I don't think most people are that bold.
Right. Yeah, this has been a discussion that comes up over and over again every time we have a discussion about cancer is it's known that traditional chemo and radiation, that one of the things that happens in the way that they kill cancer cells is by creating free radicals in the body. So therefore, anything that contains antioxidants like vitamin C or vitamin E or any of these other antioxidants are therefore going to uncouple the chemotherapy. And yet, many studies show that the more vegetables and fruits that you eat, the more likely you are to beat the cancer, the less likely you are to get cancer. And those are containing huge amounts of antioxidants. So it's never really made sense.
Also, again, I'm a data girl. So let's just say that when you look at this, your doctors, the data set they have to make decisions is disgusting. So I'll give you a perfect example. There is one study of people who have been successful like I have been on immunotherapy with colon cancer. There's one study. There's not a study what if you stop at 18 months, that data doesn't exist. What if you do this drug for 4 years, it doesn't exist. There's one study that if you do it for 2 years, here's the outcomes you can expect to achieve. So when you're listening to your doctor, actually look at the research they're referencing. Understand the limited scope of the data they have to predict efficacy. It is not what you think, where they would understand, listen, if I stop at 18 months, here's the reality of your outcomes. No, they're using the best guess based on the limited data they have, which is all we can hold them accountable for. But the data is lacking because most companies only need data to get an FDA approval, not to actually prove how to optimize the drug so you live your best life. And that's a different approach.
There's a lot of issues around data. We could talk for hours about it, but one thing to keep in mind is to conduct a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial on anything other than a drug is very difficult. So to try to run a study like that on a food when nobody's going to benefit from potentially making billions of dollars from eating pomegranates or broccoli or whatever it is, nobody's going to want to fund that study. So those studies are not done. We have limited data from these food frequency questionnaires, which are completely inaccurate. And so we just don't have comparable studies on common herbs, fruits and vegetables, many of the lifestyle factors, because there's no funding mechanism for that other than the NIH, which is basically doing some of the basic research to help the pharmaceutical companies develop their drugs. And
I would say yet. I agree with you, but the answer I would say is yet. And that is why I've started this nonprofit, Mojo Health, exist to build the data set, because I know my doctors have continuously said, we've got your data. And I'm like, you have a quarter of the data of what I actually did to heal this. So I know the reality is of what you did, you're just giving credit to the pharmaceutical, but much more went into my story than just that one drug. And so Mojo Health exists because I believe you're absolutely correct. No one company is going to pay to understand the interplay of how all these things impact health outcomes. So this needs to be based on a patient-led revolution. And that is what I'm leading. I want to invite patients to join together with me so we build the data set on what we are doing. So this might not be a double-blind placebo, but I can give you a correlation study to understand, listen, people who have your genomic type of cancer in Chile do this, and in Turkey they do this, and in Japan they do this, and the US they do this, and here's the difference in outcomes. And when we can drive people to understand how the globe heals differently and what options can give them the optimal outcomes and what interplay of options really helps that, that's how we can change cancer. We take this out of the corporation's hands and we put it in the patient's power.
that's great. You've mentioned already about using cancer blood biomarkers to track what's happening with cancer. Maybe as opposed to when your oncologist told you that you would do 6 months of chemo and then get a PET scan to see what happened. And you distinguish between the fact that the PET scan is a lagging indicator versus some of these biomarkers that can help you identify what's going on right now. Which are you progressing? Are you regressing? Can you talk more about some of those most important biomarkers?
Yeah, so there's a couple different types of biomarkers you can look at in your blood. And I think this is like measuring how many invitations were sent to the party. So you understand, how big is this party? What's happening with my cancer? So when I understood the proteins that were being developed as a result of the cancer, and if those proteins are going up, you have more cancer activity. And if they're going down, you have less cancer activity. So the first thing I looked at was something called CA19-9. That's a blood marker that's traditionally used for pancreatic cancer, but it can also be a good indicator for colon cancer as well. This is not something that's used around the globe. It's only used in a few countries. So it's one of those things that my doctor said, hey, I don't follow that. I think you're fine. You're not chemo resistant. When I came back and said, hey, I'm chemo resistant, because let's be real, that was a $30 blood test that I was doing outside of my doctor. I did that on my own. I tracked and it was going up after my second chemo administration. So I texted my doctor and said, hey, listen, I'm chemo resistant. I'm not coming back for chemo 3. And he's like, Julie, I'm the expert. Trust me. That's not a data point we follow. And I was like, these 6 industrialized countries follow this. So this is what I follow. So you need to pull data to disprove my theory in order for me to come back. Again, I don't think most patients are quite that bold, but he did 2 tests. One is a PET scan and the other was ctDNA, which most of your listeners might know, but for those that don't know, that's looking for tiny broken particles of cancer, your circulating tumor DNA. And so the reality is we don't want to use one of these tests to make a huge treatment decisions. We want to use a lot of different data points, looking at different aspects of the cancer to drive our treatment strategy. So would I have made this decision on CA19-9 alone? No. Was it a great indicator that we needed to collect more data? Yes. And the idea here is we want to collect as much data as you can before you start treatment. And I think that's a really important thing. Doctors don't tell you, hey, this tumor is not urgent. They don't tell you that. And as soon as you're told you have cancer, you think, I want this out of my body as fast as we can. But the reality is my cancer was growing for over 10 years. I had a month to stop, collect my data, get all my baseline information, build my team, build my body, take the time to do that, because then the wave you ride is much smoother versus jumping into treatment and then you're already knocked down a few pegs. So I just wanted to mention that urgency thing is really important, and to get all that baseline data so you can measure the score of the cancer early on and know when you need to fail and pivot.
Right. I was reading that your herbalist acupuncturist was also looking at things like zinc and copper and CRP and inflammation levels and things like that. And some of these markers indicate what's happening in the body that is going to change the terrain that the cancer is growing in.
That's exactly right. His biggest focus was, are you going to have a blood clot? Because you're going to die way faster than the blood clot than the cancer. So let's make sure your blood's in great order. Your neutrophil and lymphocytes are in line. Like, let's look below that first level to understand really what the score is of the health of your body and the health of your terrain. So it's not just one, it's really all of it.
Right. And most cancer patients are going to die from heart disease despite the cancer. So you don't want to beat the cancer and die of heart disease.
Which that's when I understood, I was a little angry when I learned this fact that most cancers are a metabolic disease. And in fact, if you keep your body in line, you will not only not have any hard tumor cancer, you won't have heart disease. So why didn't I know that until I dug into this world? That to me is such an important fact for everyone to understand. You can avoid heart attacks.
Yeah. And that's called the metabolic theory of cancer.
Yeah.
And that's something a lot of people in the space have been talking a lot about, including Thomas Seyfried and Nasha Winters.
Nasha Winters was the book where, I mean, my herbalist said this, and he is a friend of Nasha. So he talked about her, and I was like, I don't believe you. And so I had to go do my own research. And after talking to so many doctors and going to conferences and reading these books, I was like, I believe you. And not only do I believe you, I want to shout it from the rooftops because I know we can create a body that's inhospitable to cancer. And if given the opportunity, we need to prove exactly what we need to do that because everyone who's had cancer will do that to not have a recurrence.
Yeah, Nasha had a diagnosis similar to yours. She had a stage 4 ovarian cancer and basically was left to die. And probably the fact that she felt so horrible and couldn't eat, end up fasting for close to a month is probably what helped her body fight the cancer.
For sure.
So let's bring this to a close. Let's finish on the topic of trying to find joy in your healing process, and then tell us about your contacts.
Yeah. So, I think, one of the best things you can do for your body is to not live in fear, as I mentioned. And so I worked really hard to use joy. So as I mentioned, I dress up in costume, I bring gift bags, but it's more than that. I look at every single day and realize what I'm grateful for. I start every morning by focusing there, not on the fact that I had to fight cancer. I never once looked at that as a cross to bear. That's an invitation to change.
Right.
And when you reframe your thinking as, okay, the world's got to change. Like my world is not the same as it was yesterday. Things are different. I'm willing to accept this change. I'm willing to take on the change and do what I need to do. It wasn't a hardship. My life is better and I'm happier post-cancer diagnosis.
Right. Nasha Winters often talks about, instead of fighting cancer, cancering, and how you're basically going through this journey.
It is not a death sentence. It is a life sentence, though.
That's great. So how can listeners find out more about your program? You have a podcast, you have this website with helping cancer patients figure out how to work their way through this process.
Yeah, so I basically, as soon as I was declared no evidence of disease, I made a list of all of the reasons why cancer sucks. And I have one by one tried to systemically answer those reasons. So it started with, I wrote a book so that you would understand how to build your team. And then it started with, wait, we can do better than this. Actually, I'm going to write a job description so that you understand what your role as a patient is. Okay, wait. Now I'm going to write tools so that you understand how to select a doctor and how to build this team. Now we went forward to, as I was working with my herbalist in this team, I was like, guys, we can build this so that anyone can go and figure out how to avoid side effects online. So that is all available for free on mojohealth.org. Mojo Health, which stands for more joy, because that's what every joy comes back to everything. So mojohealth.org is the place where you can go. And we have built all sorts of resources. I just launched a What Now guide for newly diagnosed. So it'll walk you through the very first questions you should be asking, the types of data you can really start to gather to change your strategy, how you can build your team. So it walks you through step by step. But we're also just about to launch a What Now guide for caregivers, because we want to help people understand how they can gift better. And so this is one of the things I would mention is just this week, one of the challenges I faced, and let's be real, very little of what I did to save my life was covered by insurance. I'm facing financial devastation as a result of saving my life, and no one should have to face thousands and thousands of dollars in debt despite the fact that I have a wonderful job and a healthy savings account, all of that is gone because these are the reasons why you have a healthy savings account. So
Sure.
one of the tools we're building is a registry. So you can go on there and build your strategy and share that with your network, and someone else can buy you a bottle of magnesium or vitamin D instead of a coloring book or dropping off lasagna or flowers that dies. So let's actually teach people how to help you with what you need. So I am just taking this off one list at one challenge at a time, and you'll see that in my podcast. We've done podcasts everything from how to have financial wellness after diagnosis to how to prepare so you don't lose your hair with capping to most recently we just did one on how to prepare your body for radiation. So we are talking with experts around the field just all about cancer, the stuff that isn't what your doctor teaches you, but really can change your game. So we're going to not stop until I'm in the grave, because I know from what I know that we can make cancer suck less only if we work together and share the best practices and tips that each one of us share and that one-on-one level to a much broader audience.
We can make cancer suck less only if we work together.
That's exactly right. Hence the name of my podcast is Mojo Rising, how to make cancer suck less,
Thank you so much, Julie.
So grateful to be part of this. And thank you so much for helping me spread Mojo with the world.
Thank you for making it all the way through this episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, I would appreciate it if you could go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a 5-star ratings and review. If you would like to work with me personally to help you improve your health, I do accept a limited number of new patients per month for a functional medicine consultation. Some of the areas I specialize in include helping patients with specific health issues like gut problems, neurodegenerative conditions, autoimmune diseases, cardiometabolic conditions, or for an executive health screen and to help you promote longevity and take a deeper dive into some of those factors that can lead to chronic diseases along the way. Please call my Santa Monica White Sports Chiropractic and Nutrition office at 310-395-3111, and we'll set you up for a new consultation for functional medicine. And I look forward to speaking to everybody next week.